for a very long time. I wasn't here, but then something happened and I felt like I need to come here and talk about it. Perhaps something that might be helpful for you, because I understand that this is something like you have to do. If you live in Germany here, there's definitely, you will definitely have the need for you at some point to renew your passport. It's what it is. Some people have the 5 years passport, some have the 10 years passport. And if you have the 10 years passport, which I later found out that if I had known, I would have just done that, to have peace for a very long time. But if you have the 5 years Nigerian passport, what it means is that every 5 years you have to, renew it. And this process I just completed, and it kind of stressed me out. It stressed me out not because of the embassy services or the requirements that before you can actually get an appointment or to even get a passport in itself. I'm going to be leaving that for a separate video, but I'm talking about the process of you arriving at the office, because we have just two possibilities here in Germany. You either have to go to Berlin or you have to go to Frankfurt. If you are lucky, you would be living around this area, which is you are close to Berlin, you're like 2 hours or 1.5 hours or 1 hour, then you can count yourself lucky. Or you are close to Frankfurt, once again, like, I don't know, 1 hour, 1 hour, 30 minutes, count yourself lucky. But the thing is, you might be so unlucky to be living 6 or 7 hours away from these locations. And that's when things kind of get very, very interesting. See, I live close to Munich, and I was telling myself, I have to go to Frankfurt to kind of renew, my passport. Everything was done. The appointment was made. The NIM was done also. Passport renewal fee was paid. That wasn't a problem. Like I said, I'm going to make a separate video, addressing some of the hurdles I passed through, in doing that. But then, now that I have my appointment, I now have to go to Frankfurt and do the data capture. This is what it is. There's just no way you can do that online. You can book the appointment online, pay online, but the data capture itself, that you naturally have to do, by going physically to either Frankfurt or Berlin. But like I said, I was kind of closer to Frankfurt, and it shouldn't naturally have been a problem. But the problem comes from the fact that most of the time you may want to travel with the train. In this case, I had to travel, with Deutsche Bahn, and this was kind of easy to book because I took the ECE train. If you live in Germany, you know what I'm talking about, which is the high-speed train. I took that from Munich, Central Station. Technically, it should normally take 3.5 hours for me to arrive there. But the first thing that kind of hit me was that these train tickets, they were not cheap. You see, when I went to the Deutsche Bahn, website, I saw different offers. There were prices for like 179 euros just to go to, Frankfurt, which I would still consider cheap. There were prices for 225 euros, depending on what part of the train you want to, sit in. There were prices for like, 199 euros, different categories of prices. Then finally, I was lucky to see that there was also an offer that was going to be for 39 euros, which will see me arriving in Frankfurt the next day. So that means that I have to travel in the evening, about 10:30 on the particular day. So which wasn't a problem. I was like, okay, if it's going to take 5 hours, anyhow, it's going to be a waiting game. So I went ahead, bought that ticket for 39 euros, which would later become the biggest, headache that I would have had to deal with. That particular train was going to have some stops, here and there. But at the end of the day, we're going to arrive in Frankfurt the next day at about 4 o'clock in the morning, which wasn't supposed to be a bad thing. But the problem is, first of all, that journey took forever. It took forever. There were so many stops on the way. The Deutsche Bahn service was very, very bad. You kept traveling, and all you hear was that, okay, there's a little delay. You have to wait for the oncoming train to go through. There's a little blockage. There's some signal that is kind of broken. If I knew, perhaps I would have just bought the 225 euro, train ticket that would have seen me traveling for 3.5 hours without stoppage. I needed to travel at some point, change the train. It was horrible. And this was one of the problems. This is one of the problems that you would possibly deal with. And if you are having that, a need to want to travel so long to either Frankfurt or Berlin, you want to plan ahead. Take a look. If your time is very, very precious to you, if you do not have time to waste, trying to, get to this destination, you are better off just buying the expensive offer, travel the shortest distance without having to change your trips and all that stuff. Because the problem is, if one train is delayed, you stand the chance of missing the next train, because the delay this time might be like 30 minutes or even 45 minutes. And if you only had like 10 minutes to change your train, then it becomes a very, very major problem. And the other problem I also realized was that going to these embassies, I didn't know when I was going to finish, because I've had a lot of stories on the internet that you go there, when you arrive, but you never ever can tell when you're going to leave there because of the processes at the at the embassy. All right. So when I got there, I hadn't booked my return ticket at this time. So we went in. The office kind of opens at 10 o'clock. Before 10 o'clock, nothing can happen. So what that left me with was that it was going to create a situation where if I will finally finish my passport renewal, then I will now have to go ahead and look for a connecting trip back to Munich, which will not put me in a disadvantage, because I will not have to book a ticket that is just so impromptu, very short, which most of the time those kind of tickets become very, very expensive. So the problem is just kind of interconnected, and it kind of stressed me out, because when I finally finished at about 12 o'clock, checked the Deutsche Bahn app to try to get an offer back to Munich. The first ticket I saw at a reasonable price was 79 euros. Every other trip that I would have made immediately was going to cost me about 199 euros or 229 euros just to get to Munich. And I was a little bit kind of, what's going to happen? And now I'm done. It's about 13 o'clock. I don't know what to do. The train tickets are so expensive. The 79 euro ticket was going to begin at 19 o'clock in the evening. So that would have meant that I was going to wait in the city, perhaps in the train station, take a walk or just do anything, and wait until 19 o'clock before I could finally start my trip. That was kind of already pissing me out. I was a little bit kind of worried. Why do I have to wait so long, 6 hours, just because I didn't want to buy an expensive ticket? That was a little bit of stress already. This is a problem. These are the technicalities that you will be having to deal with, just because you want to renew your passport and you do not live close to either Frankfurt or Berlin. That could be a stressful situation. In any case, I had to wait. There was nothing I could do. I went all over Frankfurt, kind of visiting different sites, just trying to burn the time. I came to the Bahnhof, slept, came back to McDonald's, did everything I had to do just to finally make sure that I waited till 19 o'clock before returning back to Munich. But then this was when problems started. At 19 o'clock, when it was the time for this particular train to come, the train was nowhere to be found, because something along the way had happened and that train was cancelled. Guys, I'm telling you that this thing kind of knocked me out. I was mad at the whole situation. The Deutsche Bahn itself had nothing for us. They had no plan. They had no process in place to inform us on what we should do next. The whole Bahnhof was so rowdy, because on this particular day, a lot of technical problems were just occurring to Deutsche Bahn. The signals, the device were defect, the loudspeaker system, it was just crazy. And I don't know Frankfurt so well. I wasn't able to quickly react and just kind of look for the next connecting train to go to Munich. My battery was running out, and in the Bahnhof there was just no place to sit. So all this while we're actually standing and just hoping that somebody will give us some information on how to get a train back to Munich. Long story short, I saw that 2 hours later there was going to be a train leaving at about 20 o'clock to Munich. Of course, I had to wait, because there's just no other way to go home. I needed to go home. I was hungry. I was already tired. I was kind of pissed off, and everything just kind of going crazy. But then the train finally came. The journey began. It wasn't going to be an easy journey. At the end of the day, it became the most stressful trip I have ever witnessed, just because I wanted to renew my passport. You see, the train left, Frankfurt, went through Wolfsburg, went through Aschaffenburg, went through Nuremberg, Ingolstadt, before finally getting to Munich. I'm telling you, with all these stops was always going to be something, some delay, 20 minutes delay here, stoppage, something blocking the way. At the end of the day, I got home the next day, at about 1 o'clock. Remind you, this was a journey I started 2 days earlier. I left at 10:30. The whole day, which was yesterday, I was all there. Because of the delays and everything, I now had to arrive home at 1 o'clock in the night the next day, which was the 15th of July. Guys, I was done. I want to advise you, if you have need to renew your passport in Frankfurt or Berlin, please plan ahead, make adequate preparations for food, have money in the pocket, stay away from cheap connecting trains, because you might just be your worst undoing. I mean, I feel like this is something I need to kind of warn you guys, because it's something that you have to do anyway. Just make sure that you are planning properly, and hopefully you will not have to go through the same stress like I did. Let's see you again in the next video. Peace out.